Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about the programming part of that and Python. I know that might not be what everyone is the most interested in, but I'm going to try to keep the video fairly high level so that it will hopefully still be interesting even if you're not that interested in learning how to program. I'm going to treat this kind of like a story and walk through how I recently added a new feature to my add-on from thinking up the idea to where I had a new tool that I could use in Blender. So, I got the idea for this feature in the following way. I needed to set up a Terranode terrain to test a new feature that I was working on for Terranode, and so I went to the modifier panel and I searched and added the terrain base modifier, and then I searched and added a noise modifier, and then I wanted to put a material on it just because it was too bright with the white in the viewport. And then I just realized I'd have to go to the asset browser and browse and find my materials for the Terranode. And then I'd have to drag and drop it into the scene. And I was like, every time I have to do this task of going to the asset browser to find a material, I get annoyed that I have to do that. Because I really like how easy it is to add modifiers by searching for them, or nodes when I'm working in the node editor, where I can search in the space where I'm already working and just find and access the modifier, the asset that I want. And so the idea was, could I make a similar feature for all of the materials that are in my asset libraries? And I think almost every feature I've ever added to my add-on has started in a similar way, where it was just an idea that was born out of some problem that I found kind of annoying or something I wanted to be able to do more easily. So with that idea, I knew how I wanted this feature to work and to feel, so it was time to just start building it. I think it's very important to mention as well that at this point, I don't know exactly how I'm going to make Blender do what I have in mind. I don't know all of the commands I need to use or anything like that. Believe it or not, for the vast majority of the Blender Python API, I just don't know it off the top of my head. However, there are some parts that I do know how to do off the top of my head, such as creating an operator in my add-on as a place to write some code to implement this feature. So I started there with what I did know how to do. A minimal Blender add-on is pretty simple. It requires some info about the add-on, probably an operator that does something, and then some boilerplate code to register any of those classes with Blender when you install the add-on. I've added a link in the description to download this empty Blender add-on if you want to use it as a starting point to create your own add-on where you can write little helpful operators to do whatever you might want to do. To get started on my new feature, I copied part of an existing operator and then renamed it and changed all of the text that describes the modifier to match my new operator's purpose. A minimal operator requires some text here to display in the UI that describes what the operator does, and an execute method that runs when you use the operator. Optionally, you can also include a poll method that returns either true or false if the operator should be available right now. And also optionally, you can choose to include an invoke method that runs before execute to show a pop-up or the operator properties before the operator is used. So I've added my execute method. Currently it doesn't do anything, but I can add a print statement just to test that the correct code is running and everything's working. Now I'm editing the add-on in my scripts repository, which for some reason I don't have as a scripts folder in my Blender setup, so I instead have it set up that when I save my files, I use this extension called deploy to copy it to my Blender scripts folder. But just be aware that you do have to tell Blender about the existence of this add-on by putting it in a Blender scripts folder. Then in Blender, I can reload all of the scripts and run the operator. If I look in the system console, I can see that I got a print message, which means that everything is working so far. Now at this point, I was ready to start writing some code that actually did something. So let's stop for a moment and think about sort of the plan I had built in my head about how I wanted the operator to function. I knew that I wanted to do a few checks to make sure that I was in a valid context, so for that I can use the poll method. Then I wanted to show a searchable menu on the screen, which we can do in the invoke method. Then I wanted to populate that menu with a list of all of the materials from the asset browser. And then finally, when you select an item from that list, I wanted to append that asset to the current file and then add that material that was appended to the active object as its material. So with that as the plan, I started tackling them one at a time. Adding checks to the poll method was pretty easy. It was just, is there an active object? Does that object have object data? And does that object data have materials in it? If any of those were not true, then we couldn't run the operator. And if I think of other things that I should check, I can add them later. The next question was, how do I show a searchable menu, which I didn't know exactly how to do. So I went online and did a little searching, which led me to the invoke search pop-up method from the window manager class. Unfortunately, I was already familiar with the invoke pop-up call from the same class, and that later caused a bug that took me quite a while to find, but more on that in a bit. The entry about the invoke search pop-up on the window manager page also has some information about how you populate the list to be searched. It says, searches values of the operator's BPY types operator BL property, which must be an enum property. It is a little bit cryptic, but what it means is that we need to add a BL property to the sort of metadata of our operator that goes at the very top, and that should contain the name of an enum property, which we can add as well. Now, enum properties can either contain a hard-coded array of items, or they can point to a function that returns a dynamically generated array of items. Since the materials in our asset library could be anything, we will need to write a function that returns our list dynamically. So great, I had a function, but the next question was, how do I actually get a list of all of the materials that are in my asset library? I knew that the asset library didn't have great Python support yet, but I still did a quick search just to see if they'd added anything to the API that would help me with this. As far as I can tell, there wasn't anything helpful. So this is now a sub-problem we need to solve, so let's think about it and break it down into some simpler steps. Our goal is to get a list of all of the materials that are in the asset library. To do that, we need to open and read from each blend file that is in an asset library folder. And to do that, we need a list of all of those blend files so that we can go to and open them, but we don't have that list either. What does exist is a list of all of the asset library folders that are in our user preferences, so we'll have to use that as our starting point and then work backwards from the asset library folders to the blend files to the materials in the blend files. So to implement that, I get the asset libraries from the user preferences and loop over all of them. Then I list all of the files that are in each of those folders and discard any of the files that are not blend files. Then I had to do a little research and reading about how the data library's load method works, and then write some code that loops over any materials it finds in the .blend file and adds them to a list. At this point, I thought I would have something that would work for generating the list, so I went to test it out in Blender, and I discovered this error: incompatible return value, function result expected as set, not none. Unfortunately, there is little helpful information about this error, so I ended up spending a long time trying to fix this in the wrong place because I thought it was something with the list I had just added. And then I finally noticed, looking at the invoke search pop-up documentation, that it doesn't return anything, whereas the property pop-up that I had started with does return a result. And so the solution was to call invoke search pop-up first and then return finished in invoke. And embarrassingly, that simple change probably took 20 minutes to find. Anyway, with that bug resolved, I restored all of the code that I changed trying to find it and tested again. And this time I did get a result where I saw a list of all of the materials that I could search, but it was very, very slow. So I decided I needed to cache that list somehow so that I didn't need to generate it more than once. I thought about several different ways to do this, and eventually decided to have Blender build the list in the background over time, which means that the operator won't be fully available until the list is built. But as long as someone doesn't try to use it immediately after starting Blender, then it should be ready by the time you want to use it. So I implemented this by converting the getEnumItems function into a sort of deferred task that processes one blend file every time it runs in a timer loop. To do that, I registered the function with BPY app timers and then have it return the amount of time I want to delay before that method is run again. Another option I considered was to have it build the list the first time you use the operator, but I found that solution was too annoying when you were trying to work. Anyway, the final step in our plan is to take the material selection that was made from the menu and to actually load and apply that material to our object. All of this needed to be added to the execute function, and so to begin with, I will check if the material that was selected is already in the file, because that theoretically could happen. If it is not already in the file, then we need to append the material from the library that contains it. And then because we're appending an asset, we'll just also clear its asset status. That guarantees that the material will be in our blend file, so we can then simply apply it to the active object. Before we assign the material, we should also check that the object has a material slot to assign the material to. And if it does not, then we will create one. To make this slightly more useful, we should also load the material into the selected material slot by using the object's active material index. I then tested it out again to make sure that it was working, which it was. However, I didn't like the fact that I couldn't search for the materials by their asset library names. For example, I might want to just search for Terranode to see all of the Terranode materials in the list without having to know that one of them is called Foothills or something. So I changed the material name that is displayed in the menu so that it also included the library name, and that way I can search for Terranode to get a list of all of the Terranode materials. I then thought about where I should put this new tool in the user interface, because unless you have the developer extras option checked in the user preferences under the interface settings, operators that aren't in the menus won't appear when you search for them, and searching for them is the only way to run them if they're not in the UI. So I thought about where I should put it and decided that adding it to the add menu might work well, because then you could do like Shift A to add a material to the selected object. Adding items to menus is actually quite easy in Blender. All you need to know is the ID name of the menu. And if you have that developer extras option enabled, you can discover that just by hovering your mouse over a menu in the UI. We can see that this one is the View 3D MT for menu add. While I was at it, I also added an entry for adding a modifier to the menu. So now back in Blender, we can see those options appearing in the Object Add menu, and they can also be searched for when I pressed Shift A in the 3D viewport. So, will this be a feature that I use a lot? I honestly have no idea. I have added things before that I do use all the time, and then I've also been scrolling through my add-on file and discovered an operator that I completely forgot about. What I do enjoy is the fact that when I have an idea like this, I can customize Blender to make it even nicer for me to use, even in ways that are peculiar just to how I like to use it. So hopefully that was all interesting. It might inspire you to download that minimum add-on and experiment with writing your own simple little tools. And I also hope that it was clear that while writing a script like this definitely gets easier with experience, there's some things I just know how to do because I've done them a lot. I still frequently have to refer to the docs, and I don't know how to do everything that I want to when I first start. There's a lot of discovering along the way. Anyway, like I said, I hope that was interesting. This is a new feature that will probably be in my DJHutils add-on soon in the future. July 15th is the scheduled release date for Blender 4.5, and I've been working on updates for all of my tools to release about the same time, so look forward to that. If you're interested in any of those tools, please visit my website. There's a link for that in the description. There's tons of information over there about things that I have made for Blender. And then obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Join the Discord server. There's a link for that in the description as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Other than that, that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for watching.